Is there a better way to learn how to TIG weld than the conventional way? Running beads on carbon steel without filler metal, then with filler metal, lap joints, T-joints, butt joints. Then you might move on to stainless steel and then aluminum last.
So this video is what I believe to be a better way to learn how to TIG weld that I learned through lots of experience. This is a piece of 1/8 inch thick aluminum. It's dirty. It's been outside. It's been wet. It's been next to steel. It has specks of rust on it. I want to make sure it's clean. The other piece I'm using is a piece of 1/4 inch thick cold rolled. Pretty clean. A few specks of rust, but I'm going to go ahead and hit it with a flap disc anyway. Clean metal welds better. You don't want to chase technique when all it is prep. I've got two pieces of 332 2% lanthanated, sharpened to a point, just like I would use for steel. I'm going to use one for the aluminum, one for the steel. One of them is going to slightly round as I get started. So I'm going to start off on DC. I'm using an MT200 machine here, set on roughly 130 amps. I won't use all that amperage. I'm using a foot pedal. This is a great drill for beginners. And if you are a beginner, I would recommend starting kind of slow with a fairly slow travel speed like this, and then work on picking up your speed as you get into it and as you get more comfortable. And as you pick up the travel speed, you may need a few more amps. I'm starting out only 118 amps for a couple of reasons. That'll make me keep a fairly tight arc. The key to this exercise is to not run more than 2 or 3 beads on each metal before you switch metals. That will do a couple of things. Number one, it'll allow each piece to cool off a little bit so they won't overheat, especially the steel. The steel, once it gets oxidized, it's going to swim around and act funny. But it'll also do another thing, and that is it will make you think about it more. Switching from steel over to aluminum, you'll have a whole different sound, a different look of the puddle, a different feel of the filler metal. You'll be feeding more filler metal on the aluminum, and that'll help get your filler metal feeding hand up to speed, so that each time you pick up that steel filler metal, it's going to feel a little bit easier every time, because you won't be feeding near as much of it. It'll just be easier. Switching over to AC on this machine couldn't really be easier. That's all it takes. I'm going to take a quick glance at the AC frequency and the AC balance, make sure I'm in scope there, and now it's on to aluminum beads. I'd already been welding a bead or two on aluminum in the background, so I'm switching over to the tungsten that I've been using on aluminum. It's slightly rounded on the tip. Still got a taper on it, but it's just got a rounded tip. So each time I switch over, I'm going to switch electrodes. Here we go on the aluminum. I'm going to let that cleaning action work just for a second or two before I puddle, and then start adding rod. And you can see me flopping around with the filler metal a little bit there, and that's partly due to me being wrapped around a camera, and that's just my story, and I'm sticking to it. The great thing about padding beads on aluminum for practice is that you don't really have to wire brush no matter how many beads you run. It doesn't get an oxidized surface on it like steel does with that gray oxidized surface. So as long as you let it cool every 3 beads or so, you're good to go. Just light up on it and weld, and it's just some of the best practice you can get. Here I'm dabbing rod more frequently than usual. That's something that you should do if you're practicing here. You should try different things, try different techniques, see what works for you. Another thing you can do is switch hands periodically and get some practice with your non-dominant hand. That's for another video. This is a technique that I use a lot on T-joints, where I pull the arc back just a little bit while I add rod. This little technique has kept me from cleaning a whole lot of electrodes. When that puddle grows in height, your electrode kind of compensates for it by lengthening the arc, and you sputter a whole lot less and you dirty up a whole lot less tungsten. It's just one technique of many. Now we're going to switch back tungsten again to put the sharp one back in there, switch the machine back over to DC, one click, ready to go. I chose a cup for this little exercise that works good on both aluminum and steel. This is a number 7 furick clear pro cup. Another benefit is it lights everything up and helps me film this arc a lot better, helps everybody see everything a little bit better, and of course it helps me see a little bit better also. Another thing you get a lot of practice on with this little drill is coming to an end and not melting it away, not digging it out and tapering off. That's something you can get plenty of practice on a drill like this. Once again, I'm only welding 3 beads before I switch metals. 3 beads is enough to kind of get in the groove a little bit, but not enough to develop bad habits. And it only takes about 30 seconds to switch electrodes and change polarity for each time you switch. Like any good practice, this has to be done with some intention. You need to be asking yourself, is my arc length correct? Is my torch angle good? Is my travel speed right? Should I go faster? Should I go slower? Am I dabbing filler metal at the same increment? Am I putting the same amount of filler metal in each time? And you just want to improve all those things a little bit with every bead. The filler metal hand is something that really comes up to speed with this drill, especially when you're on the aluminum plate. This is how I usually feed it, but I feed it different ways. You should experiment with different ways to find out what works for you. I find that on the carbon steel, I can go 3 beads before I need to do some wire brushing. The first 2 beads aren't oxidized very heavily. That third one, if you wire brush it while it's still good and hot, the next one will go in better. It'll flow nice. All right, let's set that steel aside to cool, put the aluminum plate back on there, switch electrodes, back to AC and aluminum. Another thing you can do is experiment with different types of filler metal. I picked up a piece of 5356 here. You can see that just a hint of green tint in that puddle when I add filler metal. Some jobs call for 5356, others call for 4043, others call for different filler metal. But it's good to know the difference, and this is a good place to practice and understand how each filler metal flows, how it looks. Welding this many beads builds a lot of stress into a little small piece like this, especially when the travel direction is the same for every bead. And because of aluminum's property called hot shortness, where it gets brittle when it gets hot, you're going to notice a few cracks every now and then at the beginning of some of these beads. Don't worry about that. It's just a learning piece. Just pay attention to it and learn from it. Once again, you can notice my filler rod hand here. A lot more motion going on here on the aluminum than there was on the steel. The aluminum feeding of wire really brings your feeding hand up to speed better than strictly welding on steel. And again, it gives you a lot of practice on tapering off and not melting a corner away. We're going to switch over to steel and DC one more time. At the very end of the video, I'll show you all the amperage settings, the flow rates, and all the stuff. But let's weld just a little bit more on that carbon steel piece. You'll probably notice after you've run this many beads that your travel speed has picked up a little bit. Everything feels more comfortable to you. Hopefully you've increased your confidence a little bit. You feel good about yourself because you know you've invested some time, you've invested in yourself, you got just a little bit better. All the details are listed at the end. If you've seen anything in this video that interests you, you can go to weldmonger.com and learn more. The machine I used in this video was the CK MT200, and one thing I didn't really mention was I ran everything in this video off 115 volt power. It runs on 230 also, I just didn't want to run the cord. Another thing I used was the number 7 Furick Pro Cup, which really does a good job in lighting up the path and helps me see where I'm going. Coming up in just a second, all the settings, starting with steel and then aluminum. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, hit that like button, subscribe, add a comment. We'll see you next time.